Welcome to this predicted paper from Psychology Ninjas. This paper represents the best guess for the upcoming exams. Please use this paper in addition to your other revision. You can complete a unique version of this paper by going to our Psychology Ninjas site. Psychology Ninjas is full of free content to help you with your exams. You can save your scores with a free account. Explain one strength of the role of hormones to explain aggression, 2 marks. Here we have the command word explain, which is asking us to give a detailed and thorough explanation, so extending our response beyond just giving a single sentence. This question is focused on hormonal explanations, and therefore our evaluation needs to be focused on that. More specifically, we need a strength of hormonal explanations rather than anything else. We get 1 mark for identifying a strength, and it needs to be specific to hormones as an explanation. Our 2nd mark justifies why that thing we've identified is a strength for this explanation of aggression. Let's have a look at a response. There is research support suggesting that high testosterone is correlated with aggression, increasing the validity of hormonal explanations. Dolan et al. Found a positive correlation between testosterone and aggression in UK maximum security hospitals. In order to identify research support as a strength, we need to go beyond just stating that there is research support. Here we've done so by saying that the research support gives validity to the explanation. We've justified this identification with specific research evidence. Here we've gone for Dolan et al., but you could use lots of other studies to support that there is research behind testosterone linking to aggression. Explain and briefly evaluate the influence of the media on aggression, 6 marks. There's 2 command words here for the 2 separate skills, and the first one is explain. We need to give a detailed explanation of the influence of the media on aggression using key terminology. There are 3 marks available for our AO1 knowledge, and this needs to be detailed and thorough. We're then giving a brief evaluation for the remaining 3 marks. This wouldn't need to be strengths and weaknesses. You could just develop 1 strength or 1 weakness for the 3 marks available. You could do both skills, and that's absolutely fine in terms of both having strengths and weaknesses. Let's have a look at an answer. There is a general belief that consuming violent media can cause people to feel angry, think and behave more aggressively, and even tolerate aggression from others more. Desensitization to violence through the media means that individuals are less anxious and perceive it as normal, making them more likely to engage in violence themselves. This is the result of numerous exposures either to violent films or violent video games. We've started with our explanation, and we've focused our explanation on desensitization, giving specific details and then how this might have an impact in terms of the media. It's clear here that we've got a positive relationship between watching violent media and aggressive behaviour. It's now time to move on to our evaluation. Bartholow and Anderson examined the influence of violent video games by asking participants to administer a blast of white noise at their choice of volume to an opponent. Those who played a violent computer game first chose higher noise levels than those who played non-violent games. Empiricism suggests that desensitization is a valid explanation for the influence of media on aggression. We've identified specific research here, focusing specifically on the findings of what happened, and that those who had a violent video game were more likely to be aggressive in their actions. We've also said that what this means for our explanation, showing that giving research support makes it more accurate. Outline and evaluate the role of social learning theory in explaining human aggression, 8 marks. We have 2 different command words here for our 2 separate skills. So firstly, we have the command word outline, which requires us to give a detailed explanation. This is going to focus our 3 marks for our explanation on social learning theory specifically. So we need to have all of our concepts about social learning. Our remaining marks come from our other command word, evaluate. We get 5 marks for our evaluation, so this needs to be more detailed than our explanation of social learning theory. As this is a theory that we know from approaches, we also need to really make sure that it's linked into aggression specifically. Let's start with our explanation. A key concept within social learning theory is vicarious reinforcement, the process of observing role models' behaviours and how it is rewarded or punished, and subsequently learning the most effective way to act. Mediational processes explain why children may observe the same act of aggression but commit different ones. We've included key terminology here in terms of vicarious reinforcement, role models, and mediational processes, all linked into aggression. Now it's time to evaluate. Social learning theory has been supported by a large amount of empirical and controlled laboratory experiments. We've identified that there is a range of research to support this particular explanation of aggression. We now need to explain some specific research. Bandura et al. Studied male and female children ranging from 3 to 5 years old. Half were exposed to adult role models acting aggressively with a Bobo doll, for example striking it on the head with a mallet and kicking it, accompanied with verbal aggression such as saying pow, and half were exposed to models that were non-aggressive towards the dolls. The children observing an aggressive role model were more likely to imitate the behaviour. We've clearly identified Bandura's Bobo doll study and given some of the procedure. It's more important though that we've given the findings for this particular study and not a big long narrative about how research has been conducted. We're going to elaborate with some more research. Bandura also found that children who observed an adult role model being rewarded with sweets for their aggressive behaviour showed higher levels of imitation compared to children who observed the role model being punished for showing aggressive behaviour. Here we've looked at one of Bandura's variations in terms of 1965. We've talked here about the role of rewards and punishments, and again we've been clear about the impact on aggression. We're going to complete our evaluation with a mini judgment. There is external reliability with consistent findings suggesting that observation of aggression promotes aggression. We've shown our use of psychological knowledge here by suggesting that consistent findings is supporting the fact that social learning theory explains aggression. Let's return to our explanation. Bandura claimed that for social learning to take place, a child must perform mental representations of events to see if there are possible rewards or punishments, to expect future outcomes based on previous experiences. If a child is rewarded for a behaviour, he or she is likely to repeat the same action in similar situations in the future. Furthermore, if the opportunity for aggression arises in the future, a child acts based on expectations. We've discussed the role of mental representations within social learning. We've also talked about the role of rewards and punishments, talking specifically about the opportunities for aggression that arise as a consequence of vicarious reinforcement. Let's move on to our evaluation, and we're going to oppose now the role of social learning theory. There are problems concerning the artificiality of the setting, as well as the participants behaving in a way to meet the demands of the study. Both ecological validity and demand characteristics are problems with social learning theory and the research foundation of social learning theory. Let's explain this in more detail. Bandura studies have been criticised for tending to focus on the aggression of the children towards a doll rather than a real person. The doll rebounded from being hit, which may have encouraged the children to hit them and be more aggressive than in real life. The nature of the doll itself may have encouraged aggression, showing that there's a lack of internal validity within this study. If this was a real person, they wouldn't come back up, and therefore we would stop being aggressive. The rebounding nature of the doll means that more aggressive behaviours were encouraged. We're going to give a counter-argument in order to explore this paragraph and evaluation in more detail. However, Bandura did vary their study, having children divert aggression towards a real-life clown this time. The findings continue to show high levels of aggression in terms of punching and kicking from the children, which suggests that social learning theory is very high in validity. Our variation here shows a clear development in terms of ecological validity. Let's complete this with a mini conclusion. Therefore, social learning theory, as it fails to present a real-life situation of aggressive behaviour taking place, and so lacks ecological validity, questions whether the study is valid enough to support the theory. We've clearly made a problem with the nature of the research, and then the problem with the theory itself. Let's now complete our outline of this theory. Aggression may be maintained through direct experience, where a child who is aggressive is rewarded and therefore is likely to repeat the behaviour. A history of successful bullying of other children will attach more value to aggression. Children may also develop confidence in their ability to carry out aggressive actions. If acts of aggression have not been successful in the past, they have less confidence in their ability to use aggression to resolve conflict, and so use other methods of conflict resolution. We've explained the maintenance of behaviour through direct experience. attaching this to confidence and therefore success in terms of repeating these behaviours. Let's move on to our evaluation. Social learning theory is a more holistic explanation of aggression, taking into account both nature and nurture. Although elements of social learning theory are reductionist, it is more holistic than other social explanations, as both nature and nurture are taken into account. Let's now explain both the nature and nurture factors. Bandura acknowledges the role of cognitions in storing and reproducing aggressive behaviours, as well as the impact of the environment to shape or encourage the aggressive behaviours displayed. Social learning theory also accepts that there is an innate desire to learn through observation and the identification with role models. The combination of cognitive and environmental factors, as well as innate desires in terms of being born with a desire to learn, shows the holistic nature of this theory. Let's develop this with a counter-argument. However, social learning theory fails to acknowledge the role of genetics in explaining aggressive behaviour. Brunner et al. Studied a large Dutch family where many of the males behaved aggressively and had been involved in serious crimes such as rape or arson. These men were found to have abnormally low levels of MAOA, and a gene defect was later identified. We've identified an alternative explanation and given some research to develop this and why it might be more appropriate. Let's complete our evaluation with a judgment. The complexity of aggression is unlikely to be explained by social learning theory alone, and additional factors should be explored in order to explain and reduce aggression. Acknowledging the complexity of aggression shows that a range of explanations are likely to be needed. Let's complete our extended response with some concluding remarks. Research support for social learning theory suggests that it is a valid explanation of aggression. The methodology used to test the impact of role models fails to replicate real-life aggression, limiting the extent to which it can be relied on to explain aggressive behaviour. And finally, social learning theory takes into account both nature and nurture, giving a more holistic explanation of aggression. Discuss the structure of the brain as an explanation of aggression as a human behaviour, 8 marks. Here we have the command word discuss, which means we need to explain and evaluate. We're explaining brain structure or neural explanations of aggression. There are 3 marks available for our explanation of brain structure and a further 5 marks available for strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with our explanation. The limbic system is one region of the brain that has been linked to aggression. The limbic system includes the hippocampus, amygdala and hypothalamus. The identification of the amygdala in fear responses was recognised in the 1930s. Animal studies demonstrate that monkeys with damaged amygdala had a dramatic drop of fearfulness, whilst cats who had their amygdala stimulated went from placid to being prepared to attack. We've talked about the limbic system as one of the neural pathways, focusing specifically on both damage to the amygdala and stimulation to this area of the brain and its impact on aggression. Now it's time to evaluate. There is empiricism to support the role of the amygdala in aggression. We've used our psychological terminology here in terms of talking about research to support this particular region of the brain. And then we want to develop this with some particular research and their findings. Rain et al. 1997 conducted PET scans of NGRI murderers and non-murderer controls, finding that NGRIs had lower glucose metabolism in the left amygdala associated with passivity and higher in the right amygdala associated with aggression. We've gone for Rain et al.'s research here, but it really doesn't matter what research you're using to support the amygdala. Here we've specifically talked about low glucose metabolism in the left amygdala being more passive, with higher being in the right, fighting. We then want to give a counter-argument. However, there is some subjectivity in the interpretation, as 10mm slices were taken from the canthomeatal line, which varies significantly between individuals. We've used our knowledge of PET scans as a specific way of studying the brain and talked about how the interpretation might not be as objective as previously thought. We want to complete this paragraph with a mini-judgment. The use of scanning techniques and a body of evidence makes brain structure as an explanation externally reliable. Here we're talking about the consistency of findings to suggest that neural mechanisms may explain aggression. Let's return to our explanation and a different region of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is another brain structure associated with aggression. It has a role in controlling emotions and decision-making. It's thought that aggression arises because of a lack of control from or damage to the prefrontal cortex. We've identified the PFC and its role in brain structure and behaviour. We've talked about why the damage or a lack of control in here might result in aggression. Let's move into our evaluation of the PFC. Research into the function of brain structures is correlational. Here we've identified a particular research method which we can then give strengths and weaknesses of. So our explanation is going to focus on this. There is a problem establishing causation as common physical differences have different effects on different people. Individuals with high right amygdala may be aggressive, but it also correlates with anxiety, which is a vastly different human emotion. As it's correlational, we always want to say that there's a problem determining cause and effect. Here we've talked specifically about how the same brain damage results in different behaviours, which are very, very different in terms of their impact on society. We're going to give a counter-argument now. However, case study evidence reinforces the role of the PFC. Phineas Gage had damage to his PFC, making him more aggressive following his accident, which wasn't reported beforehand. We've identified a specific case study, its role in terms of neural mechanisms, and its findings in terms of aggression. Let's complete this evaluation paragraph. Extraneous variables need to be considered in explaining the relationship between brain structure and behaviour. Again, we've illustrated our broader psychological knowledge here using key terminology. Let's return to our explanation and a different brain structure. Dopamine, serotonin and noradrenaline are significant neurotransmitters in emotional responses and are all found in the prefrontal cortex. A damaged PFC results in a person wanting immediate gratification and being more impatient that makes aggression more likely as a response. The prefrontal cortex also inhibits messages from the amygdala. When damaged, fewer messages from the amygdala are filtered and might lead to more negative emotions, including aggression. Our sustained discussion focuses on the role of the PFC for immediate gratification. We've also discussed the interaction between different regions of the brain and the orbitofrontal cortex, or OFC, in inhibiting messages from the amygdala. We're going to move our evaluation on to talk about a different theory. Brain structures as an explanation of aggression are reductionist. This means that they are too simplistic and we need to consider alternatives. We want to select one to explain in order to develop our evaluation. Although Charles Whitman's post-mortem following his mass killings in Texas found a tumour on his amygdala, which would support brain structure as an explanation, we have a counter-argument. Charles Whitman was also a Marine sniper beforehand, indicating nurture may be responsible. So we need to also consider nurture and environmental factors, or social psychological explanations. The reliance on case studies of brain damaged patients makes brain structure as an explanation of aggression lack generalisability. Here we focused our conclusion on the method that we're using in order to assess brain structure. Let's complete our response by giving some concluding remarks. There is high external reliability with a range of research evidence to support the role of brain structure in aggression. There are confounding variables that need investigation to explain one damage to the same region of the brain, resulting in a wide variety of human behaviours. And finally, the focus on brain structure is reductionist and ignores the impact of social factors on aggression, such as upbringing. You can complete a unique version of this paper by going to our Psychology Ninjas site. Psychology Ninjas is full of free content to help you with your exams. You can save your scores with a free account.